On April 26, 2025, 64-year-old Austrian Martin Hornegger stands on the summit of Dablam, 6,812 meters above sea level. He is a ski mountaineering champion, a creator of alpine clothing, a man who once came back from a coma after a fall on the Grossglockner. 18 years ago, doctors gave him no chance. Now he gazes at Everest from a neighboring ridge. The summit is taken. All that remains is to descend. But on Dablam, the descent claims more lives than the ascent, and this descent will be his last. In 1958, in the small village of Annaberg, nestled among the Salzburg Alps, a tailor named Martin Hornegger Sr. opens a workshop. He has one sewing machine and one order: sports trousers. He makes them so well that soon he is approached to produce uniforms for the Austrian ski jumping team. When the jumpers step up to the start line wearing his clothes, the crowd in the stands shouts "Martini," and the name sticks to the brand forever. That is how Martini Sportswear is born, a company that will grow from a single room with a sewing machine into an international manufacturer of functional mountain apparel. In this family, where sport and craft are woven into one, on April 12, 1961, a son is born, Martin Hornegger Jr. The mountains of Salzburg are not just scenery outside his window. They are the environment in which he takes his first steps. He grows up surrounded by fabrics, patterns, and conversations about gear, but at the same time, among cliffs, glaciers, and ski routes. When his father ages, the son takes over. From 1991, Martin Jr. and his sister, Lisa Moser Hornegger, run the company together. They transform the family workshop into a brand known far beyond Austria's borders. The invention of power-stretch trousers becomes a breakthrough, a new generation of form-fitting sportswear that sets the standard for all of ski mountaineering. But Martin does not merely oversee production. He personally tests every new product on ski touring routes, on high-altitude glaciers, in conditions where clothing is pushed to its limits. For him, this is not marketing. It is a way of life in which the office and the mountaintop are separated by a single decision. In the morning, he signs contracts with fabric suppliers, and on weekends he heads out onto a glacier to test how a new membrane handles wind at 3,000 meters. It is precisely this fusion of entrepreneur and athlete that makes Martin Hornegger a figure known not only in Salzburg's business circles, but also on the start lines of Austria's toughest mountain races. By the early 2000s, those races become not just a hobby, but a full-fledged athletic career. In 2002 and 2003, Martin Hornegger wins the Austrian Ski Mountaineering Championship. This is a discipline where you climb steep slopes on skis, then descend at speed, switching between ascent and descent modes in seconds. In 2003, he enters the mountain attack in Saalbach hinter Glemm, one of the most grueling ski touring races in the world. The course crosses 6 summits, with a total elevation gain of 3,000 meters. It is an endurance marathon at the limit of human capacity, where a mistake in pacing or line choice costs dozens of minutes. Hornegger finishes first among men. He becomes the first Austrian to win this race since its founding in 1999. Mountains are not one person's passion in the Hornegger family. They are a shared language. His wife Simona Hornegger wins the women's division of mountain attack 5 years in a row, from 2002 through 2006. Their daughter Tabia climbs at the 8B level. Their son Janun reaches grade 9A and enters the elite of Austrian climbing. At the dinner table in Annaberg, they discuss not stock quotes, but ice conditions on north faces and fresh routes in the Dolomites. Martin balances running Martini Sportswear with competing at the highest level, and neither pursuit takes a back seat to the other. He leads a company that dresses mountain athletes, and he himself is one of the best among those who wear that clothing. By the age of 42, Martin Hornegger is at his peak: a successful business, athletic titles, a family that shares his passion. It seems like this man knows exactly how the balance between risk and control works, but mountains operate differently. They give everything, and take it back whenever they choose. In April 2007, Martin Hornegger climbs the Grossglockner, the highest point in Austria, 3,798 meters. This is not an exotic expedition, but a home mountain, familiar down to the last stone. Beside him are his wife Simona and daughter Tabea. The ascent goes smoothly, but on the descent, everything changes. Martin falls. The details of the accident are known only to those present, but the outcome is precisely documented: severe spinal injuries and a traumatic brain injury. A helicopter rushes him to a clinic in Salzburg. Simona and Tabea watch as he is loaded into the aircraft. Doctors place Martin in a medically induced coma. 1 week passes, then a second, then a third. Caught between hope and fear, the family waits, not knowing whether he will wake or who he will be if he does. Complications arise. Each setback looks like the final chapter, but Hornegger holds on. Doctors later say a phrase that every Austrian outlet will repeat: "No one else would have survived." This is not a compliment. It is a statement of how close he came to the edge. Slowly, through pain and relearned movements, Martin begins to recover. His family helps, his friends help. The stubbornness of a man accustomed to climbing upward when his body demands he stop, that helps too. Rehabilitation takes months. Martin relearns how to walk, readjusts to physical strain, retrains his body for coordination he once took for granted. The Grossglockner, a mountain under 4,000 meters, a home route for someone of his caliber. The accident happened not on a remote expedition, but practically within sight of his front door. That makes the whole thing even more unsettling. If mountains can take you in a familiar place, then there are no safe places. The fall on the Grossglockner does not destroy his body, but it resets his entire life, from priorities to daily routines. A man who returned from a coma will look at mountains differently, but he will never be able to give them up. Give up the mountains. That is something Martin Hornegger truly cannot do. But living the way he used to, that is also impossible. After his recovery, he makes a decision that surprises the business community of Salzburg. He steps back from day-to-day management of Martini Sportswear and hands the leadership over to his sister Lisa. The business he built for 30 years keeps running, but Martin is no longer tied to production lines and negotiations with retailers. His choice is simple and radical: mountains. Not for medals and records as in the mountain attack years. Not for business or product testing. For the movement itself, uphill through the cloud layer to altitudes where breathing becomes difficult. He starts a new family. His two youngest are still very small. He is past 60, and they are 7. Martin balances the role of father with the life of an extreme athlete, and he does neither half-heartedly. He climbs Denali, the highest point in North America, 6,190 meters. He competes in mountain bike races and ski touring marathons. He still tests Martini products in conditions that push not just the fabric, but the person wearing it. Das ist mein Leben, meine Leidenschaft. This is my life, my passion, he writes in one of his social media posts. 18 years ago, doctors did not believe he would stand again. Now, he stands on summits that most people only see in photographs. A man who nearly lost everything on the descent from the Grossglockner is back in the mountains. Martin shares his passion for the mountains with both families, the older and the younger. He takes his loved ones on ski touring routes, teaches them to read terrain and make decisions in the mountains. For him, this is not just sport. It is a way of passing on to the next generation what he received from his father, the feeling that the mountains are home. And in April 2025, he buys a spot on an expedition to the summit they call the Matterhorn of the Himalayas. Dablam stands in the very heart of the Khumbu region, 12 kilometers south of Everest. 6,812 meters, not a record height by Himalayan standards, but this mountain is feared and respected even by those who have climbed 8,000ers. Its silhouette is instantly recognizable, a sharp pyramid with 2 diverging ridges, between which hangs a glacier that looks like a piece of jewelry. That is, in fact, what the name means. Amma, mother, Dablam, a protective pendant that Sherpa women wear around their necks. The glacier cradled between the ridges, like a pendant in a mother's hands. The first ascent took place on March 13, 1961. 4 climbers from Edmund Hillary's expedition climbed the southwest ridge. Since then, this route has remained the standard, and nearly everyone follows it. Base camp sits at an elevation of 4,600 meters. Above it are 3 intermediate camps, the first at 5,700, the second at 6,100, and the third at 6,400. Between the first and second camps, the route passes through the Yellow Tower, a near-vertical rock wall rated 5.8 on the American scale in free climbing. At nearly 6,000 meters with a backpack and crampons, this becomes a serious test. Higher up begins the Mushroom Ridge, a knife edge where you must balance between two abysses. Most accidents on Dablam happen not on the ascent, but on the descent, when exhaustion hits and attention fades. In 2006, part of the hanging glacier, the very Dablam, collapsed onto the third camp. Several climbers were killed. Since then, the third camp has been considered one of the most uncomfortable spots on the route. Tents sit on a narrow ledge directly beneath the overhanging glacier. Guide John Gupta, who has led groups to this summit multiple times, puts it bluntly: a fall means death. Dablam is not the tallest mountain, but it is one of the most technically demanding. You cannot simply walk upward here. You must climb, belay, rappel, and maintain clarity of thought at an altitude where oxygen is already noticeably lacking. In the spring of 2025, Dablam greets climbers more harshly than usual. Winter has left more snow and ice on the mountain than in previous seasons. The upper 150 meters of the pyramid, that final section before the summit, are covered in solid blue ice, dense, polished, offering no grip without perfectly sharpened crampons and a precise swing of the ice axe. The fixed ropes between the first and second camps have frozen into the ice and developed an icy crust. Clipping into such a rope is harder, and trusting it is riskier. Several expeditions assess the situation and decide to turn back. Climber Ryan Mitchell and his partner abandon their summit attempt, deeming conditions too dangerous to continue. Alan Arnett, one of the most authoritative chroniclers of the Himalayan season, writes in his blog, short and to the point, "Amma is playing tough this year." Against this backdrop, the Snowy Horizon Treks expedition approaches the mountain. In the group is 64-year-old Martin Hornegger, his daughter, and his son-in-law. For Martin, this is not his first experience in big mountains. Behind him are Denali, dozens of routes in the Alps, ski mountaineering victories, and recovery from an accident that could have ended everything. But Dablam is a mountain of a different order. Here, gaining altitude is not enough. You have to get back down along the same ridge where every mistake on a rappel, every improperly clipped carabiner, can be your last. Martin knows this. He has been going to the mountains his entire life. The spring season on Dablam is quieter than autumn. There are far fewer climbers, and there are almost no queues on the ropes. But fewer people also means less help if something goes wrong. Martin understands the odds and heads upward anyway. April 26, 2025, Saturday, Martin Hornegger sets out for the summit push on Dablam. The route along the southwest ridge leads through all three high camps to the pyramidal top of the mountain. Each section demands its own technique: rock climbing on the Yellow Tower, balancing on the Mushroom Ridge, ice work on the final head wall. Hornegger takes them on one by one. The blue ice on the upper pyramid slows progress. Crampons slide on the polished surface. Every step must be calculated, but Martin does not stop. He climbs above 6,400 meters, passes the third camp, and reaches the final ridge. From here to the summit, the last few hundred meters of vertical, coated in that same solid ice Arnett had written about. Martin Hornegger reaches the mark of 6,812 meters, the summit of Dablam. From here, Everest, Lhotse, and an endless sea of Himalayan ridges stretch before him. He is 64 years old. 18 years ago, he lay in a coma after falling on the Grossglockner, and doctors gave him no chance. Now he stands on one of the most beautiful and technically challenging summits on the planet. The ascent is complete, but on Dablam, the climb up is only half the battle. Ahead lies the descent along the same ridge, over the same ice, with the same exposure. Only now, accumulated fatigue is added to the technical difficulties, the primary factor in accidents on this mountain. Martin Hornegger begins his journey back down. It is the afternoon, the sun warms the icy surfaces, and that same blue ice becomes even more slippery than it was in the morning. Every rappel must be executed with extreme care. Clip in the safety, check the knot, begin the descent without rushing, without losing control. At an altitude of over 6,000 meters, the body operates at its limit. Muscles are fatigued, coordination is diminished, reaction time is slowed. It is in these exact conditions that the outcome is decided, whether the climb ends in success or tragedy. The journey back down begins that same day. Martin Hornegger leaves the summit and moves along the ridge toward the lower camps. His daughter and son-in-law descend at their own pace. On a technical route where ropes are frozen into the ice and every rappel requires full attention, climbers often spread out along the ridge and lose visual contact with one another. At some point, contact with Martin is lost. He does not respond on the radio. He does not appear at camp. The Snowy Horizon Treks expedition records the fact. A climber who successfully summited that morning has not returned to any of the intermediate camps. The agency immediately requests a search operation. Nepal's Department of Tourism confirms Martin Hornegger is missing after reaching the summit of Dablam. A search of the descent route and surrounding sections of the mountain begins. Search teams check the ridge, the ice couloirs, and the walls below the standard line. On a mountain like Dablam, a fall can happen anywhere between the summit and base camp, and there may be no one around to see it. The exact point of the fall remains unknown. The exact time, also unknown. None of the expedition members witnessed the moment of the fall. The mountain does not record witness statements. It only keeps bodies, sometimes on the walls, sometimes at the base, sometimes forever. The spring season means fewer people on the route and fewer witnesses. If the climb had taken place in autumn, when dozens of groups are on Dablam, someone might have noticed the moment of the fall, or at least identified the section where Martin disappeared from the ridge. But in spring, the mountain is quiet. For his daughter and son-in-law, who descended safely, hours of waiting begin. They know their father summited. They know he started the descent. But they do not know where he is now. Evening falls on April 26th. Darkness comes. The temperature drops below -20. Martin Hornegger has not been found. The next day, April 27th, the search resumes at dawn. Police from the Namche district in Khumbu organize a search party. They comb the lower sections of the mountain, the zones where a body could end up after a long fall from the wall or ridge. At around 4:30 in the afternoon, the team discovers Martin Hornegger at the base of Dablam. The elevation difference from the route to the spot where the body was found is approximately 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters of free fall or sliding across rock and ice surfaces, a distance no one can survive. Such a distance leaves no chance. A helicopter transports the body to Kathmandu, to Tribhuvan University Hospital, where an examination is conducted. Nepal's Department of Tourism coordinates the process jointly with the expedition agency Snowy Horizon Treks. The procedure of documentation and preparation for repatriation to Austria begins. The body is cremated in accordance with local tradition. Martin Hornegger becomes the first fatality of the 2025 spring mountaineering season on Dablam. Earlier in April, 2 Sherpas had died on Annapurna, but on the Matterhorn of the Himalayas, the season had been loss-free until that day. Now the mountain statistics gain one more name. The cause of the fall remains undetermined. A slip on the ice, equipment failure, physical exhaustion after a long summit day. Any of these scenarios is possible, but none is confirmed. On the blue ice that covered the upper pyramid that spring, a single imprecise movement is enough to lose traction. On frozen ropes, a single jammed carabiner is enough to find yourself unprotected at a critical moment. The mountain keeps its secrets. A 64-year-old Austrian, entrepreneur, champion, a man who once came back from a coma, does not return from his final descent. News of Martin Hornegger's death spreads across Austrian media within hours. France 24, Explorer Web, Salzburger Nachrichten, Alan Arnett's blog. Dozens of outlets publish stories about the tragedy on Dablam. The mayor of Annaberg, Martin Promock, speaks words that become the defining quote in every obituary. He died doing what he loved most. We are in shock. It is simply tragic. Annaberg is a small village where everyone knows each other. Hornegger was one of those who defined the character of this place. His company provided jobs, his name was synonymous with success, and his survival story on the Grossglockner in 2007 had become local legend. Now that story is retold in a different context. In 2007, he fell from a height of 3,800 meters and survived against all odds. In 2025, he fell from a height of nearly 7,000 meters and could not get up again. 18 years between two falls, between two descents, between the Alps and the Himalayas. During those years, he built a new life, a new family, a new rhythm, dozens of summits. He proved that the accident on the Grossglockner had not broken his will. But mountains do not keep score and do not offer discounts for what you have endured. Martin Hornegger left behind 4 children, 2 adults, Tabea and Janun, and 2 little ones, 7 years old. The company Martini Sportswear, which his father started with a single sewing machine, continues to operate in Annaberg. The brand, born from the cheers of fans at a ski jump, now carries one more story. The story of a man who devoted his life to the mountains and did not return from his final descent. In the mountaineering community, they discuss the conditions of the spring season on Dablam, the frozen ropes, the blue ice, and the fact that even decades of experience are no guarantee on a mountain where a fall means death. His 2 youngest will grow up knowing their father through photographs and stories told by the older ones. Tabea and Janun will continue going to the mountains. They grew up in that world and are unlikely to leave it. Lisa will continue running Martini Sportswear, the company their father once started at a sewing machine, and their brother tested on glaciers and ridges. Martin had handed the business over to her long before the irreversible happened, and there is a logic to that. He was preparing to live in the mountains, not in an office. But the question that lingers after every tragedy like this has no simple answer. Dablam does not forgive fatigue on the descent, and everyone who approaches its base knows that. Fixed ropes, rappels, ice sections demand absolute concentration even from the most experienced. In the spring of 2025, the mountain showed that conditions can be harsher than any forecast. Blue ice on the upper pyramid, frozen ropes, expeditions that turn back, everything pointed to elevated risk. Martin Hornegger knew mountains better than most people on the planet. He grew up among them, won on them, once nearly died on them, and came back. He understood what risk meant and accepted it consciously. But understanding risk is not protection from it. Experience helps you make the right decisions, but it does not guarantee that every descent will end safely. In 1958, his father sat down at a sewing machine in Annaberg and began making trousers for those who go to the mountains. 67 years later, his son, wearing that clothing, stood on the summit of one of the most beautiful mountains on the planet. He climbed Dablam on April 26, 2025, at 64 years old, alongside his daughter, and he did not come back. On the 23rd of October, 2025, Hugo Lucio Colonia Lázaro stands on the summit of Dablam, 6,812 meters, the Matterhorn of the Himalayas. He is 65 years old, having just completed a route that tests even the young. The summit was reached at 6 in the morning. Ahead lies the descent past a hanging glacier that has already claimed lives on this mountain. Within hours, a block of ice will break free from the massif and decide everything in a single second. Within a day, Hugo will be gone. What happened between triumph on the summit and a hospital room in Kathmandu? In the very heart of Nepal's Khumbu region, among dozens of Himalayan giants, one peak stands out, not for its height, but for its shape. Dablam rises to 6,812 meters, modest by Himalayan standards, but its silhouette is unmistakable. 2 long ridges extend from the summit like outstretched arms, and between them hangs an enormous glacier, a massive block of ice clinging to a sheer wall. The Sherpas call this mountain Mother's Jewel Box. The ridges are the arms, and the glacier is the traditional pendant worn by local women. Climbers around the world know it by another nickname, the Matterhorn of the Himalayas. Elegant, sharp-pointed, perfectly sculpted by wind and time. The first successful ascent of Dablam took place in March of 1961. 4 climbers, New Zealanders Mike Gill and Wally Romanis, Briton Mike Ward, and American Barry Bishop, climbed the southwest ridge as part of an expedition led by Edmund Hillary. Since then, this route has become the standard. By the 21st century, Dablam had become the 3rd most popular peak in the Himalayas for commercial expeditions. Hundreds of climbers arrive at its base each year, drawn by its beauty and its reputation as a technically challenging yet achievable summit. But behind the beauty lies a set of statistics that expedition companies prefer not to mention in their brochures. Between 1959 and 2018, 32 people died on the slopes of Dablam. 15 fell to their deaths. 7 were caught in avalanches. 5 succumbed to altitude sickness. 3 were struck by rockfall or ice collapse. Steep rock walls, narrow ridges, icy sections, and the hanging Dablam glacier. All of this makes the mountain genuinely dangerous. In the autumn of 2025, more than 400 climbers received permits for the ascent. Among them is a 65-year-old mountaineer with Peruvian roots and a French passport, for whom this mountain will be his last. His name is Hugo Lucio Colonia Lázaro. In that name, you can hear Latin America, Peru, the Andes, the Cordillera Blanca. The surname Colonia connects him to the mountain region of Huaraz, a small city in the Peruvian Andes, at the foot of the Cordillera Blanca, which has produced many Peruvian climbers and mountain guides. Huaraz is called the capital of Peruvian mountaineering. From here, routes begin to Huascaran, Alpamayo, Artezan Raju, summits that appear on every serious Andinista's must-climb list. But Hugo has long lived in a different world. He is a French citizen, and his family settled in Switzerland, a country where mountains are part of the national identity. 3 countries, 3 mountain ranges, the Andes, the Alps, the Himalayas. Between them runs an invisible thread that defines his life. A man who grew up among one set of mountains, settled among another, and perished among a third. Remarkably little is known about Hugo's path into mountaineering. Public records do not document his previous ascents, nor mention him in club rosters or expedition lists. No climbing website carries his profile, no summit database holds his name. This does not mean he lacked experience. It means he went to the mountains without publicity, without a media footprint, like tens of thousands of enthusiasts for whom the mountains remain a private matter. A person who does not keep a blog, does not post summit selfies, does not tag geolocations. He simply goes up and comes back down. In a world where every step is tracked by GPS and posted on social media, Hugo remains invisible until the moment the mountain makes his name known in the most tragic way possible. In the autumn of 2025, Hugo makes a decision that changes everything. He joins a commercial expedition to Dablam, organized by the Nepalese company Himalaya Vision Treks and Expedition. The official name is HV International Mount Dablam Expedition 2025 Autumn 1. A commercial expedition is not a solo climb. It is a structure: guides, Sherpas, fixed ropes, pre-stocked camps, acclimatization schedules, medical oversight, and communication with rescue services. For a man of 65, this format makes sense. It provides support that a solo attempt cannot. Age is no barrier to Himalayan expeditions. 70-year-olds have summited 8,000ers, and Dablam, despite its technical difficulty, falls within the altitude range of a well-prepared individual. Hugo arrives in Nepal and begins the journey to the mountain they call the most beautiful in the world. The trek from Kathmandu to Dablam's base camp takes several days through the villages of Lukla, Namche Bazar, and Pangboche, the very same places that everyone passes through on the way to Everest. He does not yet know that he will become the season's first victim on its slopes. The route Hugo will follow has not changed in over 60 years. The southwest ridge of Dablam is the very path taken in 1961 by the first ascenders from Hillary's expedition. Since then, virtually every commercial expedition has chosen this same route. It begins at base camp, situated at roughly 4,600 meters at the foot of the mountain. From here, the way leads through a rocky moraine, a field of boulders left behind by retreating glaciers. The trail winds between stones, gaining elevation slowly but relentlessly. The first high camp, Camp 1, sits at 5,650 meters, right at the base of the ridge. Up to this point, the route is more exhausting than dangerous. Long traverses, heavy packs, the onset of oxygen deprivation. But once you clip into the fixed ropes above Camp 1, the character of the mountain changes. Rock terraces alternate with snowy ledges. Every step demands attention. Underfoot lies either smooth granite or ice-glazed stone. The ridge is narrow, the exposure grows. On both sides, cliffs drop away hundreds of meters into the void. Looming over the entire route is the Dablam glacier, the very jewel box that gave the mountain the second half of its name. This is not merely a scenic detail. It is thousands of tons of ice held against a steep wall by nothing more than friction and temperature. The glacier moves slowly, and periodically chunks break away, seracs, ice towers, individual blocks. When that happens, everything below falls within the kill zone. Predicting the moment of collapse is impossible. Every climber ascending the southwest ridge knows this, and goes anyway, because there is virtually no other way to the top. Between Camp 1 and Camp 2, the route transforms from difficult to truly technical. Granite slabs, polished by wind and ice, demand precise movement. Rock buttresses follow one after another. The climber ascends them clinging to fixed lines, sliding a jumar upward. Here you can no longer simply walk. You must climb. Hands work as hard as feet, and every mistake threatens a fall into the void. The main obstacle on this section is the Yellow Tower. It is a rock wall roughly 6 meters high, vertical and smooth. By international standards, its difficulty is rated approximately 5.5 on the YDS scale. Not extreme for an experienced rock climber, but at nearly 6,000 meters in the cold and thin air, even simple movements become an ordeal. The Yellow Tower is considered the technical crux of the entire route. Those who pass it can reach the summit. Those who cannot, turn back. Just beyond the tower, slightly higher, sits Camp 2, at approximately 6,000 meters. From here, the route leads through the next rock buttress, the Gray Tower. It is less dramatic than the yellow, but demands no less focus. Mixed terrain, ice and rock, fixed ropes angling steeply upward. Beyond the Gray Tower begins a section climbers call the Mushroom Ridge. It is a narrow snow and ice cornice stretching along the crest. To the left, a drop. To the right, a drop. Between them, a path half a meter wide, covered in snow that may hide ice beneath, or nothing at all. Here the climber is left alone with the exposure. He can see exactly how high he is, and the sight can be paralyzing. The Mushroom Ridge leads to Camp 3, a place with its own dark history. Camp 3 on Dablam sits at 6,277 meters, just 500 vertical meters below the summit. The camp occupies a narrow ledge pressed against the rock wall, directly beneath the hanging Dablam Glacier. Above, thousands of tons of ice. Below, the abyss. Tents are anchored to the rock with ropes and ice axes. The place looks precarious, and that impression does not deceive. On the night between the 13th and 14th of November, 2006, the glacier made itself known. A massive serac, an ice tower weighing hundreds of tons, tore away from the Dablam Massif and plunged downward. An avalanche of ice, snow, and rock debris crashed into Camp 3 with such force that the tents were swept away instantly. Then 6 climbers perished, 3 Europeans and 3 Nepali high-altitude workers. No one in the camp survived. The investigation concluded that even an alternative placement of tents would not have saved them. The blast zone covered the entire platform. After the 2006 catastrophe, attitudes toward Camp 3 on Dablam shifted. Many expeditions began skipping the camp entirely, pushing for the summit directly from Camp 2. Those who do climb to Camp 3 try not to spend the night. They stop in to brew hot drinks, warm frozen feet, rest for half an hour, and move on. But Camp 3 remains part of the classic route, and many commercial expeditions continue to use it as a staging point before the final push. From the camp to the summit is 4 to 6 hours of climbing over mixed terrain, ice, rock, snowfields. The last few hundred meters of elevation gain, where everything is decided. On the 23rd of October, 2025, Hugo Lucio Colonia Lázaro sets out for the final push. The night before departure is short and restless. Above 6,000 meters, sleep becomes fitful half-consciousness. The thin air won't let the brain fully rest. Each breath takes effort. Cold seeps through every gap in the sleeping bag. But when the time comes, Hugo rises and clips into the ropes. He is not alone. With him are other members of the Himalaya Vision Treks expedition. The group moves in darkness, lighting the way with headlamps. The route from Camp 3 crosses the final stretches of mixed terrain. Ice walls, rock outcrops, snowfields. Each step upward takes more and more time. At this altitude, the body operates at its limit. The heart beats 1.5 times faster than normal. Muscles receive half the usual oxygen. Coordination deteriorates. Around 6 in the morning, the group reaches the summit of Dablam, 6,812 meters. Hugo stands at the very top of the mountain they call the most beautiful in the Himalayas. From here, he can see Everest, Lhotse, and Makalu, 3 of the 5 highest peaks on the planet. The panorama that Dablam reveals is considered one of the finest in the entire Himalayan range. For Hugo, this is the culmination. He has passed the Yellow Tower, the Gray Tower, the Mushroom Ridge, the night at Camp 3, and the final ascent in pre-dawn darkness. The summit is reached. But in high-altitude mountaineering, there is a rule that every experienced climber knows. The summit is only half the journey. The other half is the descent. And the statistics are merciless. The majority of mountain tragedies occur on the way down, when adrenaline fades, strength runs out, and attention slips. The descent begins almost immediately after the summit. At nearly 7,000 meters, there is no time to linger. Every extra minute at this altitude drains resources that will be needed later. Photographs, handshakes, a brief rest, and the group turns around. The way back follows the same route: snowfields, rock outcrops, ice walls. Going down is technically no easier than going up. On the descent, balance is harder to maintain, working the ropes is more awkward, and it is easier to slip on icy rock. Fatigue from the overnight ascent accumulates, concentration drops. The body that powered through the final meters to the summit on adrenaline now demands payment for every hour spent above 6,000 meters. Hugo and his companions pass below Camp 3 and continue their descent. They are below the camp, in the zone directly exposed to the hanging Dablam Glacier. This is the very section where in 2006, a collapsing serac destroyed an entire camp, a place through which climbers try to move quickly, without stopping, without looking up, but speed offers no guarantee of safety. The glacier operates by its own laws, and the moment of collapse does not conform to expedition schedules. A block of ice can break free from the glacier at any second, triggered by a temperature swing, by vibration, by its own weight. There is no warning, no telltale sound, no time to react. At some point, a block of ice separates from the glacier mass. It hurtles downward with the acceleration of freefall, gaining speed with every meter. On a steep slope, ice can reach velocities at which the human body stands no chance. The block strikes Hugo Lucio Colonia Lázaro in the head. The impact inflicts a severe traumatic brain injury. The climber falls. According to the expedition company Himalaya Vision Treks, in addition to the head trauma, Hugo begins showing symptoms of altitude sickness and snow blindness. His body, worn down by the ascent and the impact, can no longer cope with the altitude. The combination of mechanical trauma and altitude-related damage creates a situation where every minute could be his last. Self-evacuation is impossible. Emergency extraction is needed, and it is needed immediately. The expedition team acts fast. Members of the group stabilize Hugo on the slope, as much as possible on steep terrain, in wind, at over 6,000 meters. The injured man cannot be moved without a stretcher, and there are no stretchers on the route. He cannot be left alone, but the other team members are also at the edge of their strength after the summit push. A request for emergency helicopter evacuation is transmitted via satellite link. In Nepal, rescue helicopters have long been part of the expedition infrastructure, but every flight to such altitude remains a high-risk operation. The time from the call to the helicopter's arrival depends on weather, visibility, and how busy the airbase in Lhotse is. A helicopter in the high mountains operates at the limits of its capability. The thin air at 6,000 meters cuts rotor lift by nearly half. The pilot cannot hover over a landing zone the way he would in a valley. He must fly in fast, pick up the casualty, and immediately descend before the engine can no longer handle the load. Wind on the ridge is unpredictable. Gusts can shift direction every few seconds. There is no landing pad in the conventional sense, only narrow rock ledges and snow cornices. The helicopter picks up Hugo from the Camp 3 area. The aircraft drops away, heading toward Kathmandu. The straight-line distance is less than 200 kilometers, but the altitude difference is nearly 5,000 meters, from the glacier zone down to the valley of the capital. The flight takes less than an hour. Hugo is delivered to Ham's Hospital, one of the largest private clinics in Kathmandu, accustomed to receiving climbers with altitude-related injuries. doctors document catastrophic head injuries. His condition is critical. A fight begins whose outcome is already largely decided. Too much time has passed between the ice block striking at 6,000 meters and the operating table in the valley, and the body, depleted by altitude, has no reserves left for recovery. In the early hours of the 24th of October, 2025, Hugo Lucio Colonia Lázaro dies in a ward at Ham's Hospital in Kathmandu. The doctors did everything they could, but a traumatic brain injury of that severity, sustained at extreme altitude, left virtually no chance. The body, weakened by days spent in the oxygen-deprived zone, could not muster the resources to fight. Less than 24 hours separated the moment he stood on the summit of Dablam from the moment his heart stopped. 23 hours earlier, he had seen the panorama that reveals itself only to those who reach 6,812 meters. Now, he lies in a hospital room in Kathmandu, and the doctors confirm what was nearly inevitable after being struck by a block of ice at that altitude. Hugo becomes the first fatality of the autumn 2025 season on Dablam. Nepal's Department of Tourism officially confirms the death. Himalaya Vision Treks and Expedition informs the authorities of the cause: mechanical head trauma from a falling ice block, compounded by symptoms of altitude sickness and snow blindness. The expedition company initiates a procedure that repeats every season in the Himalayas, yet never becomes any less painful: the preparation for repatriation of the body. Hugo's wife flies from Switzerland. She faces a long journey, from European comfort into the chaos of Kathmandu, where bureaucracy, the language barrier, and grief weave together into an unbearable tangle. She arrives on the 26th of October. The expedition guide appears in the capital the day before, the 25th. The paperwork for transporting the body begins: police clearances, medical reports, consular formalities. A process that under normal circumstances would take a day stretches in Nepal to several. During this time, other expeditions continue climbing Dablam. The mountain does not wait and does not mourn. While Hugo's family handles the paperwork in Kathmandu, a new tragedy unfolds on the slopes of Dablam. On the 26th of October, exactly 3 days after Hugo's death, a second climber dies on the same mountain within a week. His name is Park Hong-ki, 66 years old, a citizen of South Korea. He loses consciousness during the descent between Camp 1 and Camp 2 and never regains it. His expedition was organized by Javil Nepal Treks, with 5 participants in the group. The official cause of death has not been announced. 2 deaths in a single week on the same mountain. Even by Himalayan standards, that is a grim toll. Both climbers were over 60. Both were on the descent. Both were part of commercial expeditions. A coincidence that forces a reckoning with how modern high-altitude mountaineering works and who exactly comes to these mountains. The autumn of 2025 shapes up as a troubling season. More than 400 permits have been issued for Dablam this season, a record number. 400 people on a single route means queues on the fixed lines, pressure on summit schedules, and forced delays on dangerous sections. The longer a climber remains in the glacier's kill zone, the higher the odds that something will break loose from above at precisely that moment. The weather offers no reassurance. Meteorologist Chris Tomer publishes an alarming forecast in early November. The jet stream, the powerful high-altitude current that drives weather across the entire Himalayan region, is shifting directly over Dablam. Winds on the summit could reach 50 miles per hour. Earlier still, Cyclone Mantha had dumped heavy snowfall across the Himalayas, worsening conditions on every route in the region. Nepali authorities issue a warning to all expeditions. But permits are not revoked, camps are not struck. The season continues. With the same number of climbers, the same level of risk, and the same hanging glacier overhead. Permits keep being issued, expeditions keep arriving, and Dablam remains one of the most coveted summits for climbers around the world. Its allure is constant, that unmistakable silhouette with its outstretched ridges, that shape photographed by thousands of trekkers on their way to Everest, those sheer walls that challenge everyone who dares to climb. But the beauty of Dablam is inseparable from its danger, and the Dablam Glacier, hanging over the route, is a precise symbol of that duality. It gives the mountain its singular appearance and simultaneously poses a constant, unpredictable threat. No technology, not satellite imagery, not motion sensors, not the experience of the Sherpas, can predict when the next block will break away from the glacier. After the 2006 disaster, tactics were adjusted. Camp 3 began to be bypassed. Time spent in the danger zone was cut to a minimum. But the glacier did not disappear. It still hangs over the southwest ridge, slowly moving, slowly shedding fragments, slowly approaching its next collapse. Hugo Lucio Colonia Lázaro reached the summit of Dablam, and no one disputes that fact. He completed the entire route: base camp, 3 high camps, the Yellow Tower, the Gray Tower, the Mushroom Ridge, the final summit push in pre-dawn darkness. He stood at 6,812 meters and saw a horizon available to very few. His name is written on the list of those who climbed the Matterhorn of the Himalayas. But on the descent, in a zone that no one can control, a block of ice broke free from the massif and fell on the person who happened to be below. Neither skill, nor caution, nor the support of guides could protect against a ton of ice hurtling from a hanging wall. Between triumph and tragedy on Dablam, sometimes there are only a few minutes, a few meters, and one piece of ice traveling at a speed that no human can predict or survive. There are people who come to the mountains once and stay there forever, not in body, but in spirit, and there are people the mountains reject again and again, yet they keep coming back. Chin-Tark Chan was one of the latter. 49 years of life, 7 or 8 expeditions to Nepal, and not a single summit he hadn't earned through sheer determination. He wasn't a professional climber with his name in textbooks. He was an ordinary man with an extraordinary passion, a passion for altitude, for thin air, for that singular feeling when the ground drops away and the sky draws closer. His friends called him Chinny, warm, familiar, the way you address someone you've known and loved for years. That nickname says a lot about him. There was none of that icy distance sometimes carried by people who fancy themselves conquerors of nature. Chin was one of the guys. He could spend hours telling climbing stories over a cup of tea, laugh at his own mistakes on a route, and openly admit when the mountain had been stronger. And it was precisely that honesty, raw, without self-deception, that kept bringing him back to the Himalayas. Himlung Himal became his obsession. He had tried to summit this peak a year earlier. Something hadn't worked out. Maybe the weather, maybe his body had given in at altitude, or maybe it simply wasn't his time. But he came back. October 2025, 49 years old. His last chance before turning 50 to close this personal chapter, once and for all. Himlung Himal stands where Nepal borders Tibet, in the Nar Phu region, one of the most remote corners of the Himalayas. For a long time, this area was closed to foreigners, the Tibetan border nearby, a military zone, special permits required. It wasn't until 2001 that the mountain opened to expeditions, and climbers could finally come here without risking a violation. 7,126 meters. By Himalayan standards, not the tallest. Giants stand nearby: Manaslu, Annapurna, Dhaulagiri. But Himlung Himal doesn't need comparisons. It has its own dignity, its own beauty, and its own danger. The approach to the mountain begins in small Nepalese villages, where life flows the same way it has for centuries. The Nar and Phu valleys are another world. Stone prayer walls with carved mantras, Buddhist monasteries clinging to cliff faces, yaks grazing on highland pastures, air thick with juniper and cold. Every step through these valleys is a step back in time, into a world where civilization hasn't yet erased the ancient layers of existence. Base camp sits at nearly 5,000 meters above sea level. From there, the summit is already visible, and it looks close, a deceptive sensation familiar to anyone who has ever climbed. Between base camp and the top lie over 2 vertical kilometers, 3 intermediate camps, snow-covered slopes, glaciers, and that zone where the oxygen in the air drops to half of what it is at the foot of the mountain. Camp 1 at 5,614 meters, Camp 2 at 5,988 meters, Camp 3 at 6,400 meters, and then the final push to the summit, 7,126. Himlung Himal is considered one of the more accessible 7,000ers. Technically, the route isn't the most difficult. The North Ridge, which climbers typically follow, doesn't demand specialized rock climbing techniques or involve vertical walls. That makes it attractive to experienced amateurs, people like Chin, who had already been through a lot but never became professional mountaineers. But 7,000 meters is 7,000 meters. The mountain doesn't forgive. The company 8K Expeditions, led by director Lhotse Sherpa, specialized in exactly this kind of ascent, for experienced amateurs looking to summit a 7,000er with professional support. Lhotse knew the mountains like his own home, knew how Sherpas work, knew the price of every meter of altitude. The October expedition to Himlung Himal brought together 9 climbers and 10 Sherpas. A solid group, professional support. October is the classic autumn climbing season in Nepal. After the summer monsoons, the skies clear, the winds become moderate, and the routes grow more predictable. Chin-Tark Chan arrived on this expedition with a single personal Sherpa. Lhotse had advised him to take 2. Chin was no beginner, but his level of fitness for Himlung Himal called for closer support. Chin declined. Maybe he didn't want to appear weak. Maybe he thought he could handle it. Maybe he was simply cutting costs. That decision would later come at a very steep price. The ascent proceeded normally. The group methodically completed their acclimatization rotations, moving up through the camps. Base camp, Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3. Slowly, by the book, mountains don't tolerate haste. The body adapted to altitude, though no amount of adaptation ever makes the body fully ready for what awaits above 6,000 meters. Each time they climbed higher, the team would spend a few hours up there, and then descend to sleep lower. The classic climb high, sleep low approach that coaxes the blood into producing more red blood cells and slightly cheats physiology. Chin had been through this process before. The Himalayas were not unfamiliar to him, and yet every body responds to altitude differently. What worked last time guarantees nothing the next. At the end of October, the group set out for the summit push, and Chin-Tark Chan made it, 7,126 meters. The man who couldn't do it a year ago did it. The very mountain that had turned him away once now let him stand on its crown. What did he feel up there, on the summit? We can only guess. A 360-degree panorama of the Himalayas, clouds beneath his feet, the sensation of standing on the edge of the world, exhaustion and euphoria at the same time. Maybe he was thinking about how he'd tell his friends. Maybe he just stood there in silence, gazing at the snow-capped ridges rolling all the way to the horizon. You can't stay long on the summit of a 7,000er. The body, stripped of its usual oxygen supply, is running at full throttle. Every minute at that altitude costs more than you'd think. Climbers know the rule: take your photo, catch your breath, savor the moment, and head down. A victory only counts when you're standing alive at the base. Chin did everything right. He summited and began his descent. But the summit is only halfway. October 27th morning, the group began descending. At an altitude of roughly 6,800 meters, something happened to Chin-Tark Chan that no one expected and no one was prepared for. His body started to shut down. First came snow blindness, an agonizing condition where ultraviolet light reflected off the snowfields literally scorches the cornea. The pain is sharp, as if someone poured burning sand into your eyes. Vision blurs, tears stream uncontrollably, and every ray of light brings suffering. Then came the vomiting. Not just altitude sickness, vomiting with blood. That's a different level of alarm entirely. It's a signal that the body is seriously damaged, possibly mucosal swelling from the pressure at altitude, possibly the onset of pulmonary or cerebral edema, the primary killers at extreme heights, and finally, loss of mobility. His legs refused to work the way they should. The body that had carried him to the summit now couldn't, or wouldn't, descend on its own. At 6,800 meters, a person weighs the same as they do at sea level, but carrying someone or helping them walk is an entirely different task than it is down below. The air is thin, every step demands double the effort, and coordination is compromised for everyone at that altitude. One Sherpa against a failing human being in the high-altitude conditions. That's an almost impossible equation. The Sherpa, a man whose name in most reports about the tragedy remained unmentioned, as so often happens with those who do the hardest work in the mountains. He didn't back down. He stayed by Chin's side while other team members continued their own descent. He took on everything, supporting Chan, securing every step, refusing to let him fall. At that altitude, one person's self-sacrifice for another isn't heroism from a storybook. It's brutal, grinding labor that ends either in rescue or in what happened. 8K Expeditions immediately contacted the insurance company Global Rescue. The request was direct and urgent: helicopter evacuation from 6,800 meters. Global Rescue is an American insurance company based in New Hampshire, specializing in emergency evacuation from high-risk zones. Mountains, jungles, extreme situations. That's their specialty. Many climbers choose them precisely because they want to know. If something goes wrong, someone will come for them. The answer came quickly, and it was no. Global Rescue denied immediate evacuation, citing that a helicopter rescue at 6,800 meters, whether a hover operation or a long-line extraction, exceeds the maximum permissible altitude under Nepalese civil aviation regulations. According to their position, such an operation fell beyond safe parameters. Their recommendation: the Sherpas needed to bring Chan down to Camp 3 at 6,400 meters, where the helicopter could operate within safe limits. The difference, 400 vertical meters, sounds insignificant. In practice, it meant hours of grueling descent through snow, with a man who couldn't walk on his own, in deteriorating weather, with a single Sherpa. 8K's expeditions faced a choice: wait and descend, or act independently. They chose to act. At their own risk, they attempted to organize a helicopter hover evacuation from 6,800 meters without the insurance company's authorization. The helicopter went up, it reached the location, and it couldn't complete the operation. The weather began deteriorating rapidly and mercilessly. Snow, wind, visibility dropped to critical levels. The pilot was forced to turn back. Hours were lost. Chan remained at 6,800 meters. The snowfall didn't let up. On October 28th, the Bay of Bengal unleashed tropical cyclone Manta onto the mainland. Tropical cyclones are a common occurrence in the Indian Ocean. But when such a cyclone makes landfall in India, moist air masses surge northward and rise up along the slopes of the Himalayas. There, they condense, turning into snow. A lot of snow. An enormous amount of snow. That is exactly what happened on October 28th. Himlung Himal was buried under an extraordinary snowfall. But it wasn't alone. The entire Himalayan region turned into a frozen nightmare. Everest routes were shut down. Annapurna closed, Manaslu closed, Dhaulagiri closed. Hundreds of climbers were trapped at various altitudes, in various camps, in conditions where moving was impossible, and helicopter landings were impossible too. It would later be called the Autumn of Death. More than 1,500 people needed rescue across the Himalayan region. Around 200 foreign tourists were airlifted out, in gaps between snowstorms, during brief windows of acceptable visibility. For Chin-Tark Chan, those windows didn't exist, or they weren't enough. And on October 29th, another event sealed the sky shut. An Air Dynasty helicopter crashed near the Everest base camp area, near Lhotse, a crash with fatalities. Nepal's Civil Aviation Authority, CAAN, responded immediately. All helicopter flights in the Himalayan region were banned until further notice. The sky closed for everyone and everything. At that point, Chin-Tark Chan was near Camp 3. The Sherpas had already brought him down from 6,800 to 6,400 meters, working at the absolute limit of their strength. 2 days. 2 days of fighting, while snow buried the slopes and helicopters couldn't take off. He died on October 29th at noon, below Camp 3, at an altitude of approximately 6,500 meters. His body was found there, where his strength had finally left him for good. To grasp the full scale of the tragedy, you need to reconstruct those 48 hours as closely as possible. October 27th, morning. Chan falls ill at 6,800 meters. Symptoms escalate fast. 8K. Expeditions requests evacuation. Global Rescue denies it. The expedition organizes its own helicopter attempt. It fails due to weather. October 27th, evening. Chan's sole Sherpa begins a slow, agonizing descent with his client down the slope, one man carrying another at an altitude where there's half the oxygen as below, in worsening snowfall. October 28th, Cyclone. Manta completely engulfs the region. Visibility drops to zero. Helicopters are grounded. The Sherpa continues bringing Chan down. Slowly, meter by meter, hour by hour. Both are losing strength. Chan is growing less and less responsive. His condition is deteriorating. October 29th, morning. The Air Dynasty helicopter crashes. All flights banned. The Sherpa gets Chan to roughly 6,500 meters, between Camp 3 and the spot where he fell ill 2 days earlier. October 29th, noon. Chin-Tark. Chan dies. 2 days. 2 days of fighting for one man's life. And it still ended there, on the slope of the mountain he had so desperately wanted to conquer. What exactly killed him is hard to determine. Most likely, a combination of factors. Pulmonary or cerebral edema triggered by extreme altitude, hypothermia, physical exhaustion after the summit, and a 2-day descent in brutal conditions. Possibly a pre-existing condition that manifested right there. High-altitude medicine knows this syndrome well. When the body starts to give out at altitude, it gives out fast. Snow blindness, bloody vomiting, loss of mobility. This wasn't just a bout of altitude sickness. This was a body that had exhausted its reserves. After Chin-Tark Chan's death, a scandal erupted. Lakpa Sherpa of 8K expeditions spoke out publicly. His words were direct and sharp. Global Rescue bears responsibility for Chan's death. The insurance company denied evacuation at a critical moment, cited altitude restrictions, and that decision cost a man his life. While bureaucratic delays played out, while the expedition tried to mount its own rescue, while Sherpas single-handedly brought a weakening man down a snowy slope, the time that could have saved a life was lost. Global Rescue told a different story. According to their version, everything was done correctly. The altitude of 6,800 meters does indeed exceed safe parameters for hover operations under Nepalese aviation regulations. The recommendation to bring the patient down to Camp 3 was reasonable and standard. 8K Expedition's decision to launch an independent helicopter attempt without the insurer's authorization was the expedition's own choice, not the insurance company's. And the weather, Cyclone Manta, was a force majeure event that no one could have predicted. Who was right? That question has no clear-cut answer, and that's exactly why it's so painful. From a legal and procedural standpoint, Global Rescue's position may be entirely correct. Altitude restrictions for helicopter operations don't exist just on paper. They exist because helicopter engines perform differently in thin air. Pilots risk their lives, and one failed rescue operation can turn into 2 tragedies. From a human standpoint, a man died while the insurance company explained why it couldn't help. This debate about where the line falls between reasonable risk and bureaucratic refusal, between protecting pilots and duty toward the insured, reignited with full force in the mountaineering community after Chan's death. What is a human life worth at 6,800 meters? How far should an insurance company go when it charges premiums for extreme coverage? Was Chin's own choice partly to blame? 1 Sherpa instead of 2. Lakpa Sherpa had warned him. If 2 had been by his side, the descent would have gone faster, possibly before the weather collapsed, before flights were grounded. Was the cyclone to blame? A force of nature that listens to neither human plans nor insurance policies? Was October 2025 to blame? An anomalous, deadly season that even seasoned Himalayan veterans couldn't have imagined? Most likely, a bit of everything. A convergence of circumstances, each of which alone would have been survivable, but altogether were not. The death of Chin-Tark Chan was not the only tragedy of that autumn. Cyclone Manta unleashed a full-blown catastrophe across the Himalayas. Over 1,500 people needed rescue at the same time. Helicopters flew in literal gaps between walls of snow. Pilots risked their lives to extract stranded climbers and trekkers. Around 200 foreign nationals were airlifted out, but not everyone. Himlung Himal, for all its relative accessibility among 7,000ers, found itself in the very heart of the disaster zone. The remoteness of the Narfu region, which demands long approaches even on normal days, became a death trap for anyone caught in trouble during the snow crisis. The Air Dynasty helicopter that crashed near the Everest base camp area took lives. The flight ban was an understandable and sensible measure under the circumstances, but for Chin, That ban was the last door that slammed shut. This was an autumn when the mountains showed their true price. Not the one printed in tour operator brochures or on insurance company websites. The real one, measured in lives. When news of Chin-Tark Chan's death spread around the world, his friends and family didn't give up. They launched a GoFundMe campaign. In 2 days, they raised more than $8,000. The money went toward repatriating his body. Bringing Chin home from the Himalayas is no small undertaking, toward supporting his family, toward giving a proper farewell to a man who had returned to Nepal 7 or 8 times and had always come back, until this time. Chinny, that's what they called him, not by his official name, not by his surname. Chinny, warm, familiar. The people who knew and loved him searched for words in his obituary and couldn't stop. He was like this, he did that, he used to say this. Those are exactly the kind of words people write about someone they truly loved. In the GoFundMe entries, short messages from people who knew him personally, colleagues, neighbors, friends from hiking clubs, people he'd gone to the mountains with before. They didn't write about a great feat or a record-breaking ascent. They wrote about a person, about who he was on the ground, kind, passionate, capable of igniting others with his love for the mountains. Those kinds of comments aren't written out of politeness. They're written when the loss is real. $8,000 in 2 days? That's a lot for a crowdfunding campaign without major media coverage. It means Chin had a lot of people who wanted to do something, anything. Repatriating a body from Nepal is a logistically complex and expensive operation. High altitude, a remote area, the peak of a crisis with hundreds of people needing help simultaneously. The fact that Chin made it home, that too is someone's work, someone's effort, someone's decisions. His family in Australia got to say goodbye to him, not on the snows of Himlung Himal, but at home. The story of Chin-Tark Chan is not a story of failure. He summited. He did what he came to do. The mountain let him stand on its crown, and that matters. This is a story about the fact that going up and coming down are not the same thing. Mountain tragedy statistics say it over and over. Most deaths happen not during the ascent, but during the descent. When the energy is spent, when the euphoria of the summit hasn't yet faded, when the body that overcame everything for those few minutes at the top suddenly discovers there are no reserves left. This is a story about the rescue system, its capabilities and its limits. An insurance policy costing thousands of dollars doesn't always equal a helicopter at the right moment. Sometimes weather stands between the policy and the rescue. Sometimes bureaucracy does, sometimes physics. The thin air in which a helicopter engine loses power knows nothing about contracts and obligations. This is a story about the cost of being alone at altitude. 1 Sherpa versus 2. It seems like a small difference. In reality, it's the difference between a chance at survival and death. And finally, this is a story about the fact that mountains make no exceptions. Not for the experienced, not for those who came back again and again. Not for those who fought honestly and honestly admitted defeat. Himlung Himal welcomed Chin to its summit and claimed him on its slopes, 49 years old, 7 or 8 expeditions. A summit that had eluded him for a year, conquered. And a body that found its rest somewhere between Camp 3 and the place where there was simply no strength left to go on. His friends called him Chinny. The mountains know him differently now, as the man who kept coming back, until the very last time. On the 18th of May, 2025, 48-year-old Barna Zsolt Vago stands somewhere above 8,000 meters on the slope of Lhotse, the 4th highest mountain on the planet. He is not using supplemental oxygen. He is a cameraman, a man who spent 22 years filming news for Romania's largest television network. A man who was used to seeing the world through a camera lens, noticing things others missed. But right now, the camera is tucked away in his backpack and his vision is fading. The Lhotse couloir, a narrow ice chute leading to the summit, blurs before his eyes. His brain is starving for oxygen. His body refuses to obey. The last few hundred meters to the summit is a distance you could walk in 5 minutes at sea level. Here, in the death zone, every step could be your last. And for Barna Zsolt Vago, one of those steps will be. In Transylvania, in northwestern Romania, lives one of the largest Hungarian communities outside of Hungary. Around 1.5 million ethnic Hungarians, descendants of those who found themselves on the other side of the border after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They speak Hungarian at home, Romanian at work, and feel like they belong to both worlds. Barna Zsolt Vago was born into this world in 1977, a Transylvanian Hungarian by blood, a Romanian citizen by passport. He grew up surrounded by the Carpathian Mountains, the ranges that form the spine of Eastern Europe. The Carpathians are not the Himalayas. Romania's highest point, Moldoveanu Peak, barely exceeds 2,500 meters. But for a boy who grew up in their shadow, the mountains became his first language. He learned to read terrain before he learned to handle television equipment. He understood what slope steepness meant before he knew what focal length was. The Carpathians don't teach you high-altitude mountaineering, but they teach you the most important thing, respect for the mountains, and the understanding that every route, even a familiar one, can throw you a surprise. In the fall of 2002, 25-year-old Zsolt joins Pro TV. It is one of Romania's biggest commercial television networks, with an audience of millions across the country. Zsolt gets hired as a cameraman in the news department. Camera in hand, tripod over his shoulder, an endless cycle of shoots. For most cameramen, it is just a job. Film an interview, shoot a correspondent stand-up, send the footage to the newsroom. For Zsolt, it becomes a way of life. He films everything, from parliamentary sessions to natural disasters, from sporting events to military conflicts. His camera captures Romanian reality for 22 years straight, day after day, in scorching heat and bitter cold, in the quiet of the studio and the chaos of emergency zones. His colleagues at Pro TV would later remember him as one of the best cameramen in the newsroom, a man who didn't just know how to frame a shot technically, but had an instinctive feel for the moment. Journalist Paul Angelescu, who worked with Zsolt for many years, would tell a story that captures the cameraman's character better than any resume. In 2015, the two of them were in Nepal together when a devastating earthquake, magnitude 7.8, struck on April 25th. Buildings collapsed, the ground heaved, people ran in every direction. Angelescu recalls, "It was a real nightmare. The ground was shaking, everything was collapsing, people were running around in panic, and Zsolt just calmly held the camera and walked in the opposite direction, toward where it was most dangerous, without flinching once." For a news cameraman, running toward danger is a professional reflex. For Zsolt, it was something more. It was part of his nature, never to look away from what is frightening, but to walk straight toward it, with or without a camera. 22 years in television news means thousands of assignments, hundreds of sleepless nights, dozens of situations where the cameraman needed not just skill, but physical endurance. Zsolt worked on Romania Te Iubesc, one of the most acclaimed documentary programs on Romanian television, where film crews spend months working on investigations. He was in conflict zones and disaster areas, but wherever work took him, his inner compass always pointed one way, toward the mountains. Every vacation, every day off, Zsolt spent in the Carpathians, dozens, then hundreds of routes, from simple day hikes to technical winter ascents. The Carpathian ranges became his training ground, his place of strength, his way to reset after another brutal assignment. He hiked with friends, with colleagues, sometimes alone. Gradually, the Carpathians were no longer enough. The mountains called him higher. His first serious venture beyond the Carpathians was Mont Blanc, the highest point in the Alps, 4,808 meters. For a Transylvanian cameraman used to peaks of 2,000 meters, it was a quantum leap. Mont Blanc is not considered technically difficult, but it demands basic high-altitude skills, walking in crampons, handling an ice axe, reading glacier conditions. Zsolt reached the summit and came back down. Mont Blanc became for him what it becomes for many climbers, a gateway to the world of big mountains. Having climbed to 4,800 meters and realized that his body could handle it, that his mind stayed sharp, that the joy of altitude outweighed the suffering of the ascent, Zsolt started looking further, and further meant the Himalayas. In the fall of 2023, Zsolt and his colleague Gabriela Stancu set out on an expedition to Dablam, 6,812 meters, one of the most beautiful and technically demanding peaks in Nepal. It is a mountain often called the Matterhorn of the Himalayas for its flawless pyramidal shape. Climbing Dablam is not just about gaining altitude. It involves rock climbing on the Yellow Tower, balancing on the knife edge of Mushroom Ridge, and ice work on the final headwall. The mountain demands the full range of mountaineering skills. On October 13th at 11 in the evening, Zsolt and Gabriela leave Camp 2 with 2 Sherpas. They decide to skip Camp 3, which sits on a narrow ledge beneath an overhanging glacier and is considered one of the most dangerous spots on the route. Instead, they push for the summit directly from Camp 2. Around 3 in the morning, strong winds pick up and the temperature drops sharply. But visibility remains good. There is no snowfall, and that saves them. They keep climbing, and they reach the summit. Dablam Summit 2023, Zsolt writes in his message from the mountain. Dablam became his first Himalayan 6,000er. For a pro TV cameraman with no formal mountaineering training, it was a serious achievement. But Zsolt was already looking further. From the summit of Dablam, you can see Everest and Lhotse, 2 giants standing side by side. Zsolt saw them with his own eyes, and perhaps it was, at that very moment, standing at 6,800 meters, that he decided he would come back. Only next time, he would go higher, much higher. Lhotse, the 4th highest mountain on Earth. 8,516 meters, just 333 meters shorter than Everest. The name translates from Tibetan as South Peak, because Lhotse stands 3 kilometers south of Everest, connected to it by the saddle of the South Col at around 8,000 meters. In essence, 2 of the greatest 8,000ers on the planet are part of a single mountain massif, and expeditions to Everest and Lhotse share the same route up to Camp 4 on the South Col. From there, the paths diverge. Everest goes up along the southeast ridge. Lhotse traverses across the face and up through the couloir. The first ascent of Lhotse was made in 1956, when a Swiss expedition led by Ernst Reis and Fritz Leuchsinger went through the Khumbu icefall, the western CWM, and the Lhotse face. Since then, the route via the South Col and the Lhotse couloir has remained the standard. But standard does not mean easy. The Lhotse face is one of the most grueling sections in Himalayan mountaineering. A steep ice slope stretching roughly 1,000 meters rises from the western CWM to the South Col. Fixed ropes run across ice that changes state with every hour, rock hard in the morning, softening under the afternoon sun, refreezing into unpredictable shapes at night. Above the South Col lies the death zone. The term is not a metaphor. Above 8,000 meters, the human body cannot acclimatize. It begins to die. Every minute without supplemental oxygen at this altitude is a minute the body spends in a mode of self-destruction. Brain cells perish, muscles lose the ability to contract. Coordination falls apart. Judgment becomes flawed, and decisions turn irrational. That is why the vast majority of climbers on 8,000ers use supplemental oxygen. And that is why those who go without it make up a tiny minority, roughly 2% of all successful Everest summits. On Lhotse, the statistics are even harsher. The final stretch of the route is the Lhotse couloir, also known as the Rice couloir, a narrow ice and rock gully leading straight to the summit. Roughly 500 meters of vertical gain, where rockfall is not the exception, but the norm. The rock walls flanking the couloir constantly shed debris, and a climber moving through the gully is in a shooting gallery. The ice in the couloir can be anything, from dense water ice requiring precise crampon strikes to loose snow that collapses underfoot. Conditions in the couloir change from year to year, week to week, sometimes hour to hour. Cathy O'Dowd, the South African mountaineer who climbed this route, described the couloir as endless broken ledges tilted downward, with not a single reliable handhold for gloved hands. Crampons scraped across smooth rock. This is a place where even experienced climbers feel their pulse quicken, not from exertion, but from the realization of just how thin the line is between an ascent and a catastrophe. In the spring of 2025, Zsolt makes the decision he had been building toward for 2 years, ever since his ascent of Dablam. He signs up for an expedition to Lhotse through the Nepali company Himalayan Guides, Nepal Treks and Expedition. It is a serious undertaking, from Dablam at 6,800 meters to Lhotse at 8,500. The gap is 1,700 meters. That is not just a bit higher. It is a different universe. On 6,000ers, the body suffers from altitude, but it can still function. On 8,000ers, it dies. Slowly, but inevitably. Every hour spent above 8,000 meters is hours stolen from life. And Zsolt decides to go without supplemental oxygen. This decision turns an already brutal climb into an extreme experiment on his own body. Without oxygen, speed drops dramatically, time in the death zone increases, and the margin of safety shrinks to zero. The slightest deterioration in weather, the slightest delay on the route, and the chances of a safe outcome become vanishingly small. Why? Why would an experienced, level-headed man who spent 22 years in a profession where clear-eyed assessment of a situation is a matter of life and death decide to climb an 8,000er without oxygen? The answer probably lies in the same place as the answer to why people climb mountains at all. Supplemental oxygen is a crutch, a legitimate, logical, life-saving crutch. But for a certain type of climber, it cheapens the ascent. To summit an 8,000er with oxygen is an achievement. To summit without it is another level entirely. It is proof that the human body can exist where it was never meant to exist. Zsolt, a man who was used to walking toward danger, whether it was an earthquake in Nepal or a war zone, wanted to climb Lhotse on his own terms, without artificial help. Just him and the mountain. That formula has killed hundreds of mountaineers around the world, but everyone who steps onto the route believes it won't happen to them. In mid-April of 2025, Zsolt arrives in Kathmandu and from there makes his way to Everest Base Camp at 5,364 meters. Base camp is shared by expeditions heading for both Everest and Lhotse, as both mountains begin with the same route through the Khumbu icefall. Zsolt knows that weeks of acclimatization lie ahead, a slow, agonizing process in which the body learns to live at altitude. This is not a summit and back day trip. It is a cycle. Climb to the next camp, spend the night, descend, rest, repeat. Each cycle raises the ceiling to which the body has adapted. Camp 1 sits at 6,065 meters, just beyond the Khumbu icefall. Camp 2 at 6,400 meters in the western CWM, the vast ice valley between Everest, Lhotse, and Nuptse. Camp 3 at 7,200 meters on the Lhotse face. Camp 4, the South Col, at 7,920 meters. From there to the summit of Lhotse is roughly 600 meters of vertical gain, 600 meters that decide everything. Acclimatization takes several weeks. Zsolt climbs to Camp 2, spends a few days there, then pushes slightly below Camp 3. He follows the classic protocol: climb high, sleep low. Every push higher stresses the body. Every descent to base camp is a chance to recover. On May 5th, Zsolt posts a message from base camp. He writes, "Spent a few days at Camp 2, climbed just below Camp 3 at a slow acclimatization pace. Now, back at base camp, giving my body time to recover and my soul time to settle. From here, we wait for the signal from the rope-fixing team." This is Zsolt's last public message. In it, the professional calm of a man who understands the process. He is not rushing. He is waiting for his window. He is preparing. The spring season of 2025 on Everest and Lhotse is one of the busiest in history. 456 permits for Everest and 107 for Lhotse. Hundreds of climbers from dozens of countries converge on base camp, turning it into a tent city with internet, coffee shops, and helicopter pads. The rope-fixing teams work around the clock to prepare the route for the weather window. When the window opens, usually in the second half of May, the race begins. Dozens of people head for the summit at the same time, creating bottlenecks on the route that are themselves a risk factor. The longer you stand in line at 8,000 meters, the more oxygen you burn, and the lower your chances of getting back. For someone climbing without supplemental oxygen, a queue on the route is a death sentence. Every minute of standing still is a minute the body cannot afford. By mid-May, the route is ready. Fixed ropes are in place all the way to the top. The first climbers begin their summit, pushes on Everest and Lhotse. Zsolt sets out on his final ascent. He passes through the Khumbu icefall, a labyrinth of ice blocks where seracs can collapse at any moment. He crosses the western CWM, a blindingly white valley where the sun reflects off ice and temperatures on a windless day can climb to 30 degrees above zero, only to plunge to 20 below at night. He ascends the Lhotse face, a steep ice slope where fixed ropes are the only thing between a climber and a plunge into the abyss. He reaches the South Col, a broad rocky platform at nearly 8,000 meters, blasted by winds that would qualify as hurricane force at sea level. The South Col is a crossroads between two worlds. Turn left and you head for Everest. Turn right and you head for Lhotse. Most climbers turn left, toward the highest point on Earth. Only a handful go right, toward Lhotse. Several sources suggest that Zsolt may have attempted an Everest summit bid shortly before his push on Lhotse, but turned back without reaching the top. If true, his decision to stay on the South Col and pivot toward Lhotse instead of descending to base camp for recovery was a fatal one. A body already weakened by a failed Everest attempt was about to take another hit. A second summit push without rest at lower altitude. On the 18th of May, Zsolt begins his final climb. From the South Col, the route to Lhotse traverses across the face, a horizontal movement along a steep slope with a gradual gain in elevation. Then the path enters the couloir, that same rice couloir, the narrow ice and rock gully that leads straight to the summit. This is where the most dangerous section of the route begins. Zsolt is climbing without supplemental oxygen. Every breath delivers roughly 1/3 of the oxygen available at sea level. The brain, deprived of adequate oxygen, starts to work differently. First, thinking slows down. Decisions take longer than they should. Then, critical judgment fades. The climber loses the ability to accurately assess their own condition. Euphoria sets in, a feeling that everything is fine, that there is still strength left, that the summit is close and all it takes is one more push. This euphoria is one of the most insidious effects of hypoxia. It drives a climber to keep ascending at the very moment when every cell in the body is screaming to turn around. Zsolt is seen for the last time a few hundred meters below the summit of Lhotse. He is in the couloir, still climbing. What happens next is unknown. No one sees the moment his body gives out. No one hears his final breath. The mountain at this altitude is empty and indifferent. Nepal's Department of Tourism will later confirm that the cause of death of Barna Zsolt Vago was hypoxia, oxygen starvation of the brain. His body, deprived of supplemental oxygen above 8,000 meters, could not cope with the strain. The brain, starved of oxygen for hours, simply shut down. At an altitude where rescue is impossible, where helicopters cannot fly, and where the nearest person may be hundreds of meters above or below, losing consciousness is the same as dying. Zsolt's colleagues at Pro TV, journalist Ovidiu Oanta and Paul Angelescu, are among the first to learn of the tragedy. Angelescu, the same man who 10 years earlier stood beside Zsolt during the Nepal earthquake and watched the cameraman walk unflinchingly toward catastrophe, now writes his farewell. "Zsolt, I refuse to believe you went out up there in the Himalayas." According to his colleagues, the tragedy occurred at approximately 8,000 meters, reportedly during bad weather. Romania's Ministry of Foreign Affairs would later clarify that death occurred during the descent from Lhotse. These two accounts, ascending through the couloir and dying on the descent, do not contradict each other. Zsolt may have climbed above 8,000 meters, realized, or failed to realize, that his strength was running out, tried to turn around, and lost consciousness on the way down. Or he may have lost consciousness while still ascending, never reaching the summit. The exact timeline of his final hours will remain unknown. On that same day, the 18th of May, another climber dies on Lhotse. 39-year-old Rakesh Bishnoi, from Rajasthan, India. His story is different, but no less tragic. Bishnoi summited Lhotse but lost his strength on the descent and died near the Yellow Band, close to Camp 4. Two people on the same mountain on the same day. Lhotse collects its toll for the season. The total number of deaths during Nepal's spring climbing season of 2025 reaches 9. Mountains do not distinguish between nationalities or motivations. They are equally indifferent to a Romanian cameraman chasing a dream and an Indian climber returning from the summit. Both are killed by the same thing: altitude, lack of oxygen, and the fact that the human body was never designed to exist in the death zone. Zsolt's body is evacuated to Kathmandu. Nepal's Department of Tourism coordinates the operation together with the expedition operator, Himalayan Guides Nepal. The Romanian embassy steps in, providing consular support, obtaining the death certificate, processing the paperwork for repatriation. The bureaucracy of death in the Himalayas is a genre unto itself. Nepali laws, insurance companies, airlines, cremation, or transport. Every item requiring approvals. For a family thousands of kilometers away, this process becomes yet another ordeal. The news of Zsolt Vago's death sweeps through Romanian media instantly. Pro TV, Antenna 3, Digi24, Adevărul, G4 Media, Pagina de Media, dozens of outlets publish reports. Zsolt was not just a cameraman, he was one of their own for the entire Romanian journalism community. A man who spent 2 decades behind the camera, providing the footage that millions of viewers watched. His face was not known to the audience, the camera was always pointed away from him, never at him, but his colleagues knew who stood on the other side of the lens. Pro TV's newsroom publishes an obituary, calling him one of the oldest and best cameramen in the news division, full of enthusiasm and with a boundless desire to show the world through his camera lens. That is how those who worked alongside him describe Zsolt. The farewell comes against the backdrop of yet another grim parallel. Exactly 1 year earlier, in May of 2024, another Romanian climber died in the Himalayas, Gabriel Viorel Tabara. He too was 48 years old. He too was attempting a summit without supplemental oxygen. He was found dead in his tent at Camp 3, at 7,470 meters, preparing for a summit bid on Lhotse, but his heart stopped in his sleep. 2 Romanian climbers, both 48, both without oxygen, both in the Himalayas, both exactly 1 year apart. The coincidence is so chilling that the Romanian press cannot help but note it. Hungarian media picks up the story in parallel. Magyar Nemzet, Index.hu, HVG, Transtelex, all writing about the Romanian-Hungarian mountaineer, the Transylvanian-Hungarian alpinist. For the Hungarian audience, Zsolt is not a Romanian cameraman, but one of their own, a Hungarian from Transylvania, a member of that 1.5 million strong community beyond the border. His death is felt as a loss for the entire Hungarian world, not just Romania. The dual identity that was simply a biographical fact during his life becomes, after his death, a lens through which 2 nations look at the same tragedy, each seeing something of their own. Lhotse is a mountain that lives in Everest's shadow. It is lower, less well-known, and attracts less media attention. When someone dies on Everest, global news agencies report it. When the same happens on Lhotse, it is regional outlets and niche mountaineering blogs. But Lhotse is no less deadly. The couloir leading to its summit claims victims year after year. Rockfall, hypoxia, exhaustion, the standard set of causes of death on this mountain. And every season, there are people who believe they will be the exception. As Zsolt was not a reckless beginner. He was an experienced mountain man with dozens of Carpathian routes, Mont Blanc and Dablam behind him. He worked in a profession where a sober assessment of conditions is a matter of life and death. He went through weeks of acclimatization, following every rule, but he made one decision that overrode everything else: the refusal to use supplemental oxygen. On Dablam, at 6,800 meters, that decision has no critical consequences. The body manages. On Lhotse, at 8,500, that decision becomes fatal. The difference of 1,700 meters in altitude is the difference between a zone where the body suffers and a zone where the body dies. Zsolt spent as much time in the death zone without oxygen as his body could endure. His system gradually failed, and at some point, the reserves simply ran out. May 5th, the last message from base camp. May 18th, death in the Lhotse couloir. 13 days between 2 points. 13 days of climbing through 4 camps, through the icefall, up the face, across the South Col, to a place from which there was no return. Over those 13 days, Zsolt made dozens of decisions. Each one, taken individually, was logical. Climb to Camp 1, logical. Cross the western Dablam, logical. Push up the Lhotse face, logical. Reach the South Col, logical. Enter the couloir, logical, if you are healthy and strong. But the sum of logical decisions, layered on top of the absence of oxygen, led to the only possible outcome. A body that lost resources with every meter of altitude crossed an invisible line at some point. Beyond that line lies irreversibility. A brain deprived of oxygen stops sending signals to the muscles. The legs refuse to move. The hands cannot grip the rope. The person sits down on the ice, or falls. At 8,000 meters, no one will come to help. Or someone will come, but will not be able to do anything. lowering an unconscious person down the Lhotse couloir is a task beyond human capability. Zsolt Vago lived for 48 years. 22 of those he spent behind a pro TV camera, dozens of assignments in hotspots, the Nepal earthquake of 2015 when he walked toward catastrophe with a camera in his hands, Mont Blanc, Dablam, hundreds of routes in the Carpathians. He saw the world through a lens, and he saw it more clearly than most. A camera teaches you to notice details, to build composition, to find a story in chaos. He carried those skills from his profession into the mountains. He saw a mountain not as an obstacle, but as a shot, grand, beautiful, and beyond human control. He wanted to climb Lhotse without oxygen, because for him, that was the only honest way to meet the mountain, without intermediaries, without chemistry, just breath and altitude. The mountain accepted his terms and answered with its own. In the mountaineering community, Zsolt Vago's death does not spark lengthy debate. An 8,000er without oxygen. Everyone understands how that can end. Alan Arnett, the leading chronicler of Himalayan seasons, notes the fact in his blog, Romanian Zsolt Vago, 48, died at the Lhotse couloir on ascent. Explorer's Web adds, 2 climbers attempting to add Lhotse to their program did not return alive. The season statistics gain 2 more lines, Vago and Bishnoi. The mountains keep their own ledger. Every name is a line in the table. Every line is someone's life, someone's family, someone's dream that ended on an icy slope above the clouds. At Pro TV, someone else will take his place behind the camera. The news will go on, stories will be filmed, edited, and broadcast. Viewers will not notice the change of cameraman. They never saw him in the first place. The camera was always pointed away from Zsolt, never at him. But those who worked alongside him for 2 decades will remember the unflappable Transylvanian who walked toward earthquakes and dreamed of Himalayan summits. In the Carpathians, the trails he hiked hundreds of times will remain. On Dablam, the memory of the nighttime push from Camp 2 in 2023 will remain, when the wind hammered their faces and the stars hung so low it seemed you could reach out and touch them. On Lhotse, the couloir that took another life in the endless procession of spring seasons will remain. Barna Zsolt Vago entered the Lhotse couloir on the 18th of May 2025 at 48 years old without supplemental oxygen. He did not return. The camera stayed in his backpack. The last frame was never shot. On May 14, 2025, around 8 in the evening, 45-year-old Philipp Santiago II reaches Camp 4 on the south col of Everest, altitude nearly 8,000 meters. The death zone. The camp sits on a broad, rocky ledge between Everest and Lhotse, exposed to every wind that blows with such force the tents vibrate like sails in a storm. Philipp arrives here utterly spent. A week ago, an avalanche in the Khumbu icefall nearly killed him. It knocked him off his feet, buried him in snow, and for a time, he lost consciousness. His face was battered. 6 days of rest, an examination by the expedition doctor, clearance to continue. And now, here he is, in a tent on the South Col, just hours from the summit that had been his dream for 18 years. He lies down to rest before the final push. He will never wake up. In the Philippines, an archipelago of more than 7,000 islands in the Western Pacific, there is a naming tradition inherited from the American colonial era. A father passes his name to his son, adding a Roman numeral, the 2nd, the 3rd, sometimes the 4th. It is not an aristocratic title. It is a mark of family continuity, a chain linking generations. Philipp Santiago II bore his father's name with pride. To friends and family, he was simply PJ, an engineer, a father, a man who spent his whole life balancing the demands of a career with the call of the mountains. The Philippines is a country where mountaineering exists in an entirely different context than in Europe or South America. The highest point of the archipelago, Mount Apo on the island of Mindanao, barely exceeds 2,900 meters. That is trekking, not high-altitude climbing. There is no snow in the Philippines, no glaciers, crampons, ice axes, ascenders. These are tools of another world, a world that a Filipino climber must seek thousands of kilometers from home. To become a high-altitude mountaineer, a Filipino does not just need desire. They need to rebuild their entire frame of reference, learn to walk on ice, breathe thin air, sleep in a tent at -30, all of it from scratch without the cultural environment that in Nepal or Switzerland is absorbed from childhood. PJ was an engineer, a man accustomed to calculations, to systems thinking, to finding solutions within constraints. He brought that engineering approach to the mountains. Preparing for Everest took years. He ran full marathons, 42 kilometers, with a mountaineering pack weighing 15 kilograms on his back. This is not standard runner training. It is a simulation of what awaits on the mountain, hours of movement under load, where every step is an effort and every ascent is a test for the heart and lungs. He took specialized courses in ice climbing and snow technique, skills impossible to acquire on tropical islands. In 2023, he flew to Nepal twice, first reaching Everest Base Camp, then summiting one of the surrounding peaks to feel the altitude firsthand. 2 years of methodical, engineering-grade preparation. But PJ was not climbing Everest just for himself. His ascent had a mission, and that mission was bigger than the summit. Philipp Santiago dedicated his climb to children battling cancer. Climbing Everest is very little compared to the battles these little warriors fight every single day, he said in a video message recorded before the expedition. We want to draw attention to their fight and their cause. On top of that, PJ supported the Clean Water Philippines initiative, a project bringing clean water to remote communities across the Philippine Islands. 2 causes, 2 reasons to stand on the highest point on Earth and tell the world about those the world overlooks. For PJ, Everest was not a trophy. It was a megaphone. From his earliest days, Philip felt drawn to the edge, to the place where the familiar world ends and the unknown begins. As far back as I can remember, I have always had this desire, to see the edge and come back to tell my story, he once said. This was not bravado or youthful recklessness. It was a deep-seated need of a person who feels life more intensely when approaching its limits. Mountains offer that sensation in its purest form. Every meter of altitude narrows the comfort zone. Every camp higher than the last brings you closer to the line where the human body stops functioning. PJ had been searching for that line his entire life. On Everest, he found it. In the entire history of mountaineering on Everest, only 5 Filipinos had reached the summit. The first was Leo Arosa in 2007. After him, 4 more over the following years. PJ wanted to become the 6th for the small mountaineering community of the Philippines, which has no Himalayan tradition, no government-funded expeditions, no schools of high-altitude climbing. Every Everest summit is an event of national significance. PJ carried on his shoulders not just a pack with oxygen bottles, but the hopes of an entire community. In the spring of 2025, PJ arrives in Kathmandu and joins the Mountaineering Association of Krishnanagar, Snowy Everest Expedition 2025, organized by Snowy Horizon Treks. It is one of dozens of commercial expeditions that send clients to Everest every spring season. Nepal's commercial mountaineering system has been refined to perfection. For a sum ranging from $30,000 to $100,000, a client gets logistics, Sherpa guides, bottled oxygen, tents at every camp, food, and communications. But no amount of money buys a guarantee of return. The mountain remains a mountain. The 2025 season on Everest is massive. The Nepalese government issued 456 permits, authorizations to climb. Add to that the Sherpa guides, porters, and camera crews, and base camp at 5,364 meters becomes home to more than 1,000 people. A tent city with generators, satellite internet, coffee shops, and a helicopter pad. From here begins the route through 4 camps to the summit: the Khumbu Icefall, the Western Siddhbum, the Lhotse Face, the South Col, and the final push along the southeast ridge through the Hillary Steppe. A route walked by thousands over 70 years. A route that has claimed hundreds of lives. Acclimatization takes several weeks. The climb to Camp 1, 6,065 meters, goes through the Khumbu Icefall. The icefall is a living labyrinth of ice blocks the size of apartment buildings, slowly but continuously sliding down the slope. Crevasses open and close. Seracs, towers of ice, loom over the trail, threatening to collapse at any second. Aluminum ladders laid across the gaps are the only bridges over the abyss. Every passage through the icefall is a lottery. Most accidents on the Nepalese side of Everest happen right here. It is in the Khumbu icefall that PJ encounters the mountain's first warning. Roughly a week before the final push, during one of the acclimatization rotations, an avalanche hits the group. A mass of snow crashes onto the trail, knocking people off their feet. PJ is buried. He loses consciousness. Seconds, maybe minutes. Time dissolves when the brain shuts down. He is saved by his Sherpa guide, Dawa Rinzing. Risking his own life, Dawa rushes to the spot where his client lies buried under snow and pulls him out. PJ comes to with a battered face, scrapes, bruises, possibly a mild concussion. The avalanche that could have been his grave becomes a warning instead. But warnings only work when a person is willing to hear them. The expedition doctor examines PJ. 6 days of rest at base camp. Observation, reflex checks, monitoring. On the 7th day, the doctor delivers his assessment. Condition satisfactory, cleared to continue. This decision is one of those that, in the aftermath of tragedy, seems like an obvious mistake, but at the moment it was made, appeared perfectly justified. PJ is conscious, PJ is walking, PJ is talking, PJ wants to continue. He did not come here to turn around at base camp after 6 days of rest. Behind him, years of preparation, tens of thousands of dollars spent on the expedition, children with cancer to whom he had promised to reach the summit, an entire country watching his climb. The pressure, external and internal, is enormous. There is a concept in mountaineering psychology called summit fever. It is a state where the drive toward the goal eclipses any rational assessment of risk. A climber who has invested months of preparation and tens of thousands of dollars subconsciously filters out danger signals. The body says stop, but the mind says just a little further. An avalanche, a facial injury, loss of consciousness. To a sober outside observer, these are a collection of red flags, each one on its own grounds for ending the expedition. But for a person standing at Everest Base Camp with the dream of a lifetime within arm's reach, those flags fade against the backdrop of the summit. PJ decides to continue. He sets out for the final push. The route from Base Camp to Camp 4 takes several days. Camp 1, through the Khumbu icefall, the very place where a week ago an avalanche came crashing down on him. Every step across the aluminum ladders, every turn between the seracs, a reminder that the mountain already tried to stop him once. But PJ keeps going. The western Dablam, a vast ice valley, blindingly white, where sun reflecting off the snow drives daytime temperatures to unbearable heat, while at night they plunge below -20. The Lhotse face, a steep wall of ice where fixed ropes stretch upward like threads of a spider's web. Camp 2, Camp 3, waypoints on the road to the South Col, and then Camp 4, the South Col. 7,920 meters, a windswept saddle between Everest and Lhotse, littered with rocks, empty oxygen bottles, and shredded remnants of tents. Here, the wind blows with such force it sometimes tears tents away, along with the people inside. Here, the air holds only a third of the oxygen available at sea level. Here begins the death zone, the altitude at which the human body cannot acclimatize, and begins slowly dying with every passing minute. PJ reaches Camp 4 around 8 in the evening on May 14th. He arrives in a state of extreme exhaustion. The standard plan at the South Col is to rest a few hours, drink something hot, check gear, and head out for the summit around midnight, aiming to reach the top at dawn when the wind eases slightly. PJ crawls into his tent, lies down, closes his eyes. What happens inside a human body at 8,000 meters after days of climbing, compounded by a recent injury? The body is running at its limit. The heart beats faster than normal, compensating for the lack of oxygen by pumping a greater volume of blood. The lungs expand to maximum capacity, yet each breath delivers so little oxygen that the cells remain starved. The brain, the organ most sensitive to hypoxia, begins to malfunction. Thinking slows, priorities blur. Sleep regulation breaks down. Muscles, depleted by days of climbing, do not recover. At this altitude, the body is incapable of proper regeneration. The kidneys operate in emergency mode, struggling to maintain the acid-base balance of the blood. Every system in the body is functioning on the edge of failure. Add to that the aftermath of the avalanche a week earlier. The impact, the loss of consciousness, a possible concussion. 6 days of rest that were likely insufficient for full recovery. PJ's body arrived at the South Col running a resource deficit that could not be compensated by oxygen bottles, hot tea, or sheer willpower. His body exhausted its reserves somewhere between Camp 3 and Camp 4, but the momentum of movement, physical and psychological, carried him onward. At altitude, the threshold between extremely tired but managing and the body is shutting down can be impossibly thin. PJ falls asleep in his tent on the South Col. During sleep at nearly 8,000 meters, breathing slows. This is a normal response. At altitude, many climbers experience what is known as Cheney-Stokes respiration, cycles in which breathing gradually deepens, then weakens, and for a few seconds stops entirely before the cycle repeats. For a healthy person at this altitude, it is unpleasant but not fatal. For a person pushed to the absolute limit, a person who survived an avalanche and sits on the brink of physical collapse, every pause in breathing is a moment when the brain is starved of oxygen. One of those pauses may have been the last. The brain, balanced on the edge, simply failed to restart the breathing cycle, or the heart, worn to its breaking point, stopped in sleep. The exact cause of death of Philipp Santiago II was never definitively established. The official wording was exhaustion. But behind that word lies a combination of factors: hypoxia, physical depletion, the aftermath of injury, and an altitude that forgives no weakness. On the morning of May 15th, his expedition teammates discover that PJ is not moving. Attempts to wake him are futile. The doctor pronounces him dead. At nearly 8,000 meters, in a tent at Camp 4, Philipp Santiago II completes his final route, not on the summit he had strived for, but a few hundred meters below it in his sleep before he could make the final push. PJ becomes the first foreign climber to die in the spring season of 2025 on Everest, but not the last. A few days later, 45-year-old Indian climber Subrata Ghosh will die on the descent from the summit. He reached the top, but lost his strength coming down and perished near the Hillary Step. That same season, 3 more will die on Everest, Sherpas and guides whose names rarely make headlines, but whose lives are worth exactly the same. The 2025 season will claim 5 lives on Everest, fewer than the 8 the previous year, and significantly fewer than the 18 in 2023. But statistics are a comfort only to those who have not lost anyone. Spring 2025 on Everest was a season of contrasts. On May 5th, an earthquake of magnitude 5.5 shook the region. The epicenter was near the Tibetan city of Shigatse, but the tremors were felt at base camp. Wind above Camp 4 shifted unpredictably. The jet stream, the high-altitude current, would retreat from the summit, opening weather windows for the push, then slam back down, creating hurricane conditions. Between May 13th and the 27th, more than 80% of all successful summits for the season took place. The window was narrow, the pressure on climbers immense. Miss the window. Lose an entire year and all the money invested. This urgency, this pressure, an invisible but very real risk factor. People set out for the summit when their bodies are not ready. People keep climbing when they should turn back. People fall asleep at Camp 4 when they should be heading down. The news of PJ's death sweeps across the Philippines instantly. Rappler, Inquirer, GMA News, Manila Bulletin, Philstar. Every major Filipino media outlet publishes coverage. Journalist Emil Sumangil, PJ's cousin, reports the tragedy on air. He shares that, on the last day of contact, PJ had expected to go for the summit on May 15th, the morning after his arrival at Camp 4. PJ's nephew, Carl Miguel Santiago, who had been supporting his uncle from base camp, is among the first to learn of his death. For a family that had been following the climb in real time, through satellite messages, through photos from the camps, through short voice recordings, the shift from hope to tragedy takes just a few hours. The Philippine mountaineering community, small, tight-knit, where everyone knows each other, responds with a wave of grief and respect. PJ is called a symbol of courage, perseverance, and love for the mountains. His story, the story of an ordinary man, an engineer, a father, who set out to climb the highest point on earth not for glory, but for a cause, resonates far beyond the mountaineering circle. Philippine media outlets air his pre-expedition video, in which he speaks about children with cancer, about clean water, about wanting to see the edge and come back to tell his story. The video garners hundreds of thousands of views. A man who in life was known only to a small circle becomes, in death, a national story. GMA News airs a special report by journalist Rafi Tima. The Filipino, whose fateful Everest climb was dedicated to children with cancer. The report features PJ's own words recorded before the expedition, photos from training, footage from base camp. Journalists track down the organizations PJ supported, childhood cancer initiatives, clean water projects. The tragedy on Everest unexpectedly achieves what PJ had been working toward all along. It draws attention to these causes. The irony is cruel and unplanned. His death proves a louder megaphone than his summit ever could have been. On May 23rd, 9 days after his death, the body of Philipp Santiago II is evacuated from the South Col. The operation to bring a body down from nearly 8,000 meters is itself an act of heroism. At that altitude, every kilogram of weight, every meter of descent demands superhuman effort. The Sherpas who carry out this work risk their own lives. The body is brought to base camp, then airlifted by helicopter to Kathmandu. The bureaucracy of death begins. A death certificate in Nepali and English, coordination with the Philippine embassy, paperwork for repatriation. Nepalese law requires that the bodies of fallen climbers be evacuated. The mountain is not supposed to become a cemetery, though in reality, more than 200 bodies remain on its slopes, frozen into the ice. Everest collects its toll every season. Since 1922, when the first expedition attempted to reach the summit, the mountain has claimed more than 300 lives. The statistics fluctuate from year to year, from 0 deaths to 18. But the trend is relentless. As long as people go to Everest, people will die on it. Commercial mountaineering has made the summit more accessible, but not safer. Fixed ropes, bottled oxygen, Sherpa guides, all of these reduce the technical risks, but they do not change the fundamental truth. At 8,000 meters, the human body is in a zone it was never designed for, and no amount of money, no amount of training, no amount of motivation can guarantee a return. PJ knew this. He had been preparing for Everest for 18 years, from the moment he first caught fire with the idea of becoming the 6th Filipino on the summit. He trained with the precision of an engineer, marathons with a loaded pack, ice climbing, 2 visits to base camp. He planned the logistics, found an expedition operator, raised the funds. He even found a purpose that transcended personal achievement, childhood cancer and clean water. Everything was structured like an engineering project, clear phases, checkpoints, contingency plans. But a mountain is not an engineering project. A mountain is a system with an infinite number of variables, most of which are beyond anyone's control. The avalanche in the Khumbu icefall was not in the plan. Losing consciousness under the snow was not in the plan. 6 days of forced rest, compressing an already narrow weather window, were not in the plan. The decision to continue after the injury, was it an engineer's calculation or summit fever? There is no one left to answer that question. Dawa Rinzing, the Sherpa who pulled PJ from under the avalanche, saved his life once. There was no second time. On the South Col, in his tent at Camp 4, PJ died alone, in his sleep, with no witnesses. No one stood beside him with a headlamp, no one shook his shoulder, no one called for a helicopter. At 8,000 meters, helicopters do not fly. Rescue from the South Col is an operation that takes hours, sometimes days, and does not always end in success. Alan Arnett, the preeminent chronicler of Himalayan seasons, records PJ's death in his blog. Filipino climber Philipp Santiago II, 45 years old, died at Camp 4 on Everest, the first foreign climber, death of the season. Explorer's Web, a specialized portal covering expeditions, adds context. A narrow weather window, high winds, pressure on climbers racing to summit before the season closes. Everest.I publishes a daily update. A tough day on Everest. It is with deep sadness we report the death of Philipp Santiago II, a climber from the Philippines who passed away at Camp 4. Out of respect, please allow space before sharing details or photos. Fact-checkers on social media are forced to debunk fake videos that begin circulating immediately after the news. footage from other incidents falsely attributed to PJ's death. Dying on Everest in the age of social media is not just a family's grief, it is content for millions of viewers, most of whom have never seen the mountain closer than on a phone screen. Every tragedy becomes clickbait, every body on the slope a fragment of someone else's video. In the Philippines, people remember not just PJ, they remember every Filipino climber who ever attempted Everest, the 5 who returned from the summit and those who never returned at all. The Asian Journal publishes a long-form piece, Above the Clouds, Triumphs and Tragedies of Filipino Climbers on Everest, weaving PJ's story into a broader context, the context of a country where the mountains are tropical and low, and the dream of the Himalayas requires crossing half the globe. Philipp Santiago II lived 45 years. Of those, years of engineering work, years of training runs with a 15-kilogram pack, 2 trips to Nepal, countless hours studying routes and weather windows. He recorded a video message speaking about children with cancer and clean water. He embraced his nephew at base camp. He survived an avalanche, lost consciousness, came to with a battered face, and decided to keep going. He crossed the icefall, the western Sigbem, the Lhotse face, and reached the South Col. He lay down in his tent at Camp 4. He did not wake up. The summit of Everest was just a few hours' walk away. The next morning, other climbers left Camp 4 and made it to the top. PJ should have been among them, the 6th Filipino on the summit of the world, a man who wanted to see the edge and come back to tell his story. He saw the edge. He could not come back. On the South Col of Everest, the wind keeps blowing, the tents vibrate, oxygen bottles lie scattered among the rocks. Somewhere below, at base camp, a satellite phone transmits the news no one wanted to hear. Somewhere lower still, in Manila, the family of an engineer named PJ learns that he will never come home. And even further below, in children's oncology wards, kids continue their battles PJ wanted to tell the world about from the highest point on the planet. He did not reach the summit, but his voice, recorded on video before the expedition, now rings louder than it ever could have from up there.